Life is a tapestry woven with threads of joy and sorrow, success and failure, love and loss. We navigate this complex journey, often wondering why pain seems to lurk beneath the surface of our experiences. What if the struggles we face are not random misfortunes, but profound truths that every human being must confront? In this exploration, we delve into 6 life-changing truths from Buddhist wisdom that, while potentially uncomfortable at first, hold the key to awakening, freedom, and lasting peace. Buddhism offers us a lens through which to understand the root of our suffering by revealing the deeper realities that many try to avoid. It invites us to see life with new eyes, to look beyond the surface of our daily struggles, and recognize the patterns and truths that underlie them. These truths are not meant to bring despair, but to guide us toward a deeper acceptance and a more meaningful way of living. The first truth is a stark reminder that life is fleeting. We often live as if we have all the time in the world, delaying what truly matters and chasing after things that cannot last. Buddhism teaches us about impermanence, the understanding that everything that arises will also pass. From our youth and relationships to our successes and even our breath, all is temporary. The Dhammapada tells us that it is not the length of our lives that matters, but whether we are awake while we are here. This awareness can transform how we live, prompting us to prioritize presence over distraction and depth over noise. The second truth confronts us with the reality that people will hurt us and we will hurt others. It is tempting to expect perfection from those we love, but Buddhism reminds us that we are all human, flawed, wounded, and often unaware of our own pain. The 3 poisons of ignorance, attachment, and aversion drive us to act in ways that harm others, not because we are bad, but because we are unconscious. By acknowledging this shared humanity, we can practice compassion and forgiveness, recognizing that we are not our pain and others are not their mistakes. Thirdly, Buddhism teaches us that everything can change in a split second. Life's unpredictability can be both unsettling and liberating. When we truly grasp the impermanence of all things, we stop taking life for granted and learn to cherish each moment. The story of the man who lost everything in a flood, yet found peace in the understanding that this too has changed, illustrates the clarity that comes from embracing change. Fourthly, we are invited to recognize that what we own is not who we are. In a world that equates self-worth with possessions and status, Buddhism challenges us to look inward and find our true value. The teachings on non-self anatta remind us that our worth is not tied to external labels, but to our capacity to love, grow, and exist. The fifth truth acknowledges that there is always pain before success. Suffering is a natural part of life, and Buddhism views it not as something to avoid, but as a path to growth. The Buddha's own journey from hardship to enlightenment exemplifies how pain can be the soil in which wisdom grows. Finally, no one escapes aging, sickness, and death. This truth, while challenging, can be a door to deeper understanding and peace. By facing our mortality, we learn to live with wisdom and compassion, appreciating the preciousness of each moment. These 6 truths are not easy to accept, but they offer us a profound opportunity. They invite us to move beyond resistance and denial, to embrace life's impermanence and imperfection, and to find freedom in acceptance. As we explore these teachings, we embark on a journey toward living fully awake, with presence, compassion, and courage. Let us begin this journey together, allowing these truths to guide us toward a deeper understanding of life and ourselves. Point No. One life is short. Embracing the Buddhist teaching on impermanence. Life, in all its beauty and complexity, is fleeting. We often find ourselves caught up in the illusion of permanence, thinking that we have all the time in the world to achieve our goals, nurture our relationships, and experience the richness of existence. Yet the reality is that life is short, and every moment we live is a precious gift that we must cherish deeply. This profound truth is at the heart of Buddhist teachings on impermanence, a concept known as anicca in Pali. To truly understand and embrace this teaching is to begin a transformative journey toward living more mindfully, compassionately, and authentically. The illusion of permanence. From a young age, we are conditioned to believe in the permanence of things. We form attachments to people, possessions, and achievements, thinking that they will provide lasting happiness and security. We build our lives around routines and expectations, assuming that tomorrow will unfold much like today. Yet, life has a way of reminding us, often unexpectedly, that nothing is guaranteed. Relationships change, jobs end, health declines, and even the most stable circumstances can shift in an instant. This illusion of permanence is a source of suffering because it leads us to take life for granted. We delay important conversations, put off expressing our love and gratitude, and fail to appreciate the present moment. We become so focused on the future, on what we might achieve or acquire, that we miss the beauty and significance of what is happening right now. The Buddha recognized this fundamental human tendency and taught that understanding impermanence is essential for awakening from the sleep of delusion. The teaching on impermanence. At the core of Buddhist philosophy is the understanding that all conditioned things are impermanent. This includes not only external objects and circumstances, but also our thoughts, emotions, and even the sense of self. The Dhammapada, a collection of the Buddha's sayings, states, "Better than 100 years lived without seeing the rise and fall of things is one day lived seeing their rise and fall." This verse challenges us to shift our focus from the quantity of life to the quality of our awareness. It suggests that true fulfillment comes not from living a long life, but from being fully present and awake during the time we have. When we recognize that everything is in a constant state of flux, we begin to see the futility of clinging to people, possessions, and experiences. We learn to appreciate them not as permanent fixtures in our lives, but as transient phenomena that enrich our journey. The psychological impact of impermanence. Understanding that life is short can evoke a range of emotions, from fear and anxiety to sadness and longing. These feelings are natural responses to the realization that nothing lasts forever. However, Buddhism teaches us that these emotions need not be sources of suffering. Instead, they can become catalysts for profound change and growth. When we acknowledge the impermanence of life, we are prompted to examine our priorities. We may ask ourselves, what truly matters to me? How do I want to spend my time? Who do I want to surround myself with? These questions can lead us to make meaningful changes in our lives, such as mending broken relationships, pursuing passions we've long neglected, or simply savoring the moments we share with loved ones. Moreover, the awareness of life's brevity can free us from the paralysis of perfectionism. So often we delay taking action until we feel fully prepared or until circumstances seem ideal. But the truth is that perfection is unattainable and the future is uncertain. By embracing the transient nature of life, we can develop the courage to act in the present moment, even when we feel unready or afraid. The practice of mindfulness. Central to Buddhist practice is mindfulness, the cultivation of present moment awareness. By training our minds to stay focused on the here and now, we can begin to experience life in all its depth and richness. Mindfulness allows us to appreciate the beauty of a sunset, the warmth of a friend's embrace, or the simple joy of a mindful breath. It teaches us to find contentment in the present rather than constantly seeking happiness in the future. One powerful mindfulness practice is the contemplation of impermanence. Take a few moments each day to reflect on the transient nature of your experiences. Notice how your thoughts and emotions come and go like clouds in the sky. Observe the changes in your body, how your sensations shift from moment to moment. By doing so, you develop a direct experience of impermanence, which can deepen your understanding and acceptance of life's fleeting nature. Letting go of clinging. A significant aspect of embracing impermanence is learning to let go of clinging. Clinging arises from our fear of loss and our desire to control life's outcomes. We cling to relationships, fearing abandonment, to possessions, fearing poverty, and to our identities, fearing insignificance. Yet, clinging only leads to suffering because it resists the natural flow of life. Buddhism teaches that freedom comes from non-attachment, not from detachment. Non-attachment does not mean that we do not care or engage with the world. Rather, it means that we participate fully in life while releasing our need to control or possess. We can love deeply without fearing loss, strive for success without being defined by it, and enjoy possessions without being enslaved by them. Letting go of clinging is a gradual process that requires patience and self-compassion. It involves recognizing when we are holding on too tightly and gently releasing our grip. As we practice non-attachment, we discover an inner freedom that is not dependent on external circumstances. We find peace in the midst of change and resilience in the face of loss. The gift of time. When we truly grasp that life is short, we begin to value time differently. Instead of squandering our days on distractions and trivial pursuits, we prioritize what matters most. We invest our time in building meaningful connections, pursuing personal growth, and contributing to the well-being of others. This shift in perspective can transform how we approach each day. We may wake up with a sense of purpose and intention, knowing that we have a limited amount of time to make a difference in the world. We may become more selective about how we spend our energy, choosing activities that align with our values and bring us joy. Furthermore, the awareness of life's impermanence can foster a greater sense of gratitude. We learn to appreciate the small moments that often go unnoticed: the taste of a meal, the sound of laughter, the comfort of a familiar place. Gratitude deepens our connection to life and enhances our overall sense of well-being. Facing mortality with wisdom and grace. One of the most profound aspects of embracing the shortness of life is how it invites us to confront our mortality. Death is a reality that none of us can escape. Yet it is a topic that many avoid. Buddhism encourages us to reflect on death not as a morbid exercise, but as a way to live more fully. By acknowledging that death is inevitable, we can release the anxiety that often surrounds it. We can prepare for death by living in a way that reflects our true priorities and values. This might involve mending relationships, expressing our love and forgiveness, and ensuring that we have lived authentically. Death also serves as a powerful reminder of the preciousness of life. When we recognize that our time is limited, we are more likely to live with urgency and intention. We may choose to pursue our passions, to explore new experiences, and to deepen our connections with others. In this way, the awareness of death becomes a catalyst for living a more vibrant and meaningful life. The ripple effect of understanding impermanence. As we internalize the truth that life is short, our perspective expands beyond our individual concerns to encompass the broader human experience. We recognize that everyone we meet is navigating their own journey of impermanence, facing their fears of loss and change. This shared reality fosters compassion and empathy, breaking down the barriers that separate us from one another. Understanding impermanence also cultivates humility. We see that none of us are immune to life's uncertainties, and that we all struggle with the same fundamental truths. This humility softens our judgments of others and ourselves, allowing for greater understanding and forgiveness. Moreover, the awareness of life's transient nature can inspire us to contribute to the greater good. Knowing that our time is limited, we may feel a stronger sense of responsibility to leave a positive legacy, whether through acts of kindness, creative expression, or efforts to protect the planet for future generations. Integrating the teaching into daily life. Embracing the Buddhist teaching that life is short is not about living in constant fear of endings or loss. Instead, it is about awakening to the beauty and significance of each moment. Here are some practical ways to integrate this understanding into your daily life. 1. Practice mindfulness. Take time each day to be fully present in your experiences. Whether you are eating a meal, taking a walk, or conversing with a friend, give your full attention to the activity. Notice the sensations, emotions, and thoughts that arise without judgment. 2. Reflect on impermanence. Set aside moments for contemplation. Reflect on the transient nature of your thoughts, emotions, and circumstances. Consider how your possessions, relationships, and achievements are all temporary and how this awareness affects your relationship to them. 3. Cultivate gratitude. Regularly acknowledge the blessings in your life. Keep a gratitude journal or take time each evening to reflect on the moments that brought you joy or peace. Express gratitude to the people who enrich your life. 4. Live with intention. Set daily or weekly intentions for how you want to live. Ask yourself how you can align your actions with your values and priorities. Make conscious choices about how you spend your time and energy. 5. Practice letting go. Identify areas of your life where you are clinging to people, possessions, or outcomes. Gently release your grip, trusting that life will unfold as it should. Practice non-attachment while still engaging fully with the world. 6. Engage with compassion. Recognize the shared humanity in everyone you meet. Practice kindness and understanding, knowing that others are also navigating the challenges of impermanence. Look for opportunities to serve and support others. 7. Meditate on death. Periodically reflect on the inevitability of death. Consider how this awareness influences your approach to life. Use this reflection as a motivation to live authentically and purposefully. Conclusion. The Buddhist teaching that life is short is not meant to inspire despair, but to awaken us to the profound beauty and significance of each moment. By embracing the truth of impermanence, we learn to live with greater awareness, compassion, and intention. We discover that freedom comes not from holding on, but from letting go, and that true fulfillment lies not in the accumulation of possessions or achievements, but in the depth of our experiences and connections. As you journey through life, remember that every breath you take is a gift, every moment an opportunity to grow and to love. Let the awareness of life's fleeting nature inspire you to live fully, to cherish deeply, and to walk this path with wisdom and grace. In doing so, you will find that even in life's brevity, there is endless possibility for meaning, joy, and transformation. Point no. 2. People will hurt you, and you will hurt others. Embracing compassion and forgiveness in the face of human imperfection. Human relationships are the tapestry of our existence, woven with threads of love, connection, and inevitably pain. We enter relationships with high hopes, longing for understanding, loyalty, and joy. Yet sooner or later, most of us experience the sting of betrayal, the ache of unmet expectations, or the sorrow of unintentional harm. Buddhism acknowledges this harsh reality with profound empathy. People will hurt you, and you will hurt others. This truth is not a condemnation of humanity, but a clear-eyed recognition of our shared imperfection. Rooted in the Buddha's teachings on the three poisons, ignorance, attachment, and aversion, it invites us to transform suffering into wisdom and compassion. The inevitability of emotional harm. Relationships, by their nature, are vulnerable spaces where two imperfect beings collide. We enter them with hearts wide open, yet our flaws, fears, and unexamined patterns often lead to misunderstandings, conflicts, and hurt. Sometimes the pain is intentional, a lie, a betrayal, a refusal to apologize. Other times, it's accidental, a careless remark, a moment of silence when words were needed, or a failure to notice someone's pain. Why does this happen? Buddhism points to the three poisons as the culprits. 1. Ignorance, avidya, a lack of awareness about the causes of suffering and the impermanent, interconnected nature of life. 2. Attachment, lobha, sickling to desires, expectations, and the illusion of control over others. 3. Aversion, dosa, resisting discomfort, whether it's anger, fear, or the urge to punish others for their mistakes. These poisons drive us to act in ways that harm others, often without realizing it. We lash out when we feel threatened, withdraw when we're hurt, or project our unmet needs onto loved ones. The same poisons blind us to the complexity of others' suffering, leading us to judge or dismiss their actions. The role of expectations. A significant source of relational pain is unmet expectations. We expect partners to intuit our needs, friends to prioritize us, or family to align with our values. When these expectations aren't met, disappointment festers into resentment. Buddhism teaches that expectations are chains we forge ourselves. They stem from ignorance of anatta, non-self. The idea that no one possesses a fixed, independent identity. People change, grow, and carry their own wounds, just as we do. Expecting them to perfectly mirror our desires ignores their humanity. The Buddha famously said, "Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional." While hurt may be unavoidable, clinging to narratives like "they should have known better" or "I deserve better" amplifies suffering. Letting go of rigid expectations doesn't mean settling for less. It means freeing ourselves to engage with others as they truly are, flawed, evolving, and worthy of compassion. Compassion, the antidote to resentment. When we're hurt, anger and vengeance often feel justified. Buddhism challenges this urge with a radical perspective. Holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent to throw it. We're the ones who get burned. Instead, it invites us to cultivate metta, loving kindness, and karuna, compassion. Compassion doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it acknowledges the deeper pain driving it. The person who betrays us may be acting out of their own fear or unhealed trauma. The friend who forgets our birthday might be distracted by their struggles. By seeing others suffering, we begin to soften our hearts. This isn't about naivete, it's about recognizing that everyone, including ourselves, is navigating life's challenges with limited awareness. Forgiveness, liberation for the heart. Forgiveness is not for the other person's benefit, it's for our own. Carrying grudges chains us to the past, poisoning our present with bitterness. Buddhism teaches that forgiveness is a practice, not a single act. It begins with acknowledging the pain and validating its legitimacy. Then, through mindfulness and reflection, we gradually release the narrative of victimhood. This doesn't mean forgetting or condoning harm. It means choosing freedom over suffering. As the Zen proverb says, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Forgiveness allows us to reclaim our peace, even as we set boundaries to protect ourselves. Acknowledging our own capacity to harm. Just as others hurt us, we too cause pain, often without intending to. We may speak harshly in moments of stress, neglect someone's feelings, or prioritize our needs over theirs. The Buddha reminded us that we are not our mistakes, but our actions still have consequences. This truth invites humility. When we recognize our capacity for harm, we become more mindful of our words and deeds. We learn to apologize sincerely, not out of obligation, but from a place of genuine remorse. As the Japanese practice of tete dachain, apologizing wholeheartedly, teaches, true remorse acknowledges the pain caused and commits to growth. Transforming pain into wisdom, Buddhism views suffering as a teacher. When we step hurt, we can ask, what is this pain revealing about my expectations or fears? How can I respond with compassion rather than react with anger? What boundaries do I need to protect my well-being? Similarly, when we hurt others, we can reflect, what unmet need or fear drove my actions? How can I repair this relationship? What habit or mindset do I need to change to avoid repeating this harm? Through this introspection, pain becomes a catalyst for self-awareness and growth. It mirrors back to us the areas where healing is needed, not just in our relationships, but within our own hearts. Practices for healing and connection. 1. Metta meditation. Cultivate loving kindness by silently repeating phrases like, may you be happy, may you be free from suffering. Direct these wishes first to yourself, then to loved ones, neutral people, and even those who've hurt you. 2. A compassion journaling. Write about a time you were hurt. Instead of focusing on blame, explore the other person's perspective. Ask, what pain might they have been carrying? 3. Apology with accountability. When you've caused harm, approach the injured party with humility, acknowledge your mistake, express remorse, and ask how you can make amends. 4. Boundaries as self-compassion. Recognize that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's an act of self-care. Use mindful communication to express your needs clearly and kindly. Conclusion. The truth that people will hurt us and we will hurt others is a testament to our shared humanity, not a flaw to be erased. By embracing this reality with compassion and forgiveness, we transform suffering into a bridge toward deeper understanding. We learn to love without idealizing others, to forgive without condoning harm, and to grow through the inevitable cracks in our relationships. In doing so, we honor the Buddhist teaching, hatred never ceases through hatred. Hatred ceases through love. When we accept that imperfection is woven into the fabric of connection, we open ourselves to a more resilient, compassionate way of relating. We discover that even in brokenness, there is beauty, and that healing is always possible. Point note 3. Everything can change in a split second. Embracing impermanence as a path to liberation and resilience. Life is inherently unpredictable. Just as a calm lake can suddenly become a stormy sea, our lives can shift dramatically in an instant. A phone call, a diagnosis, a split-second decision, all have the power to alter the trajectory of our existence. Buddhism refers to this as anicca, or impermanence, one of its central teachings. While this truth can evoke anxiety, Buddhism invites us to see impermanence not as a threat but as a gateway to freedom. By embracing the transient nature of all things, we can cultivate resilience, presence, and a deeper appreciation for life's fleeting beauty. The illusion of control. Humans are wired to seek stability. We create routines, make plans, and cling to the belief that we can control our futures. Yet life constantly reminds us of our limitations. A loved one leaves, a job is lost, or an unexpected illness arises. These moments shatter our illusions of permanence, leaving us feeling vulnerable and disoriented. Buddhism teaches that suffering arises from our resistance to change. We cling to the past, fear the future, and reject the present when it doesn't align with our expectations. This resistance is rooted in the 3 poisons: ignorance, not understanding impermanence; attachment, clinging to what we desire; and aversion, fear of loss. By recognizing these poisons, we can begin to dismantle our attachment to control and open ourselves to life's natural flow. The nature of impermanence. Impermanence is not just about dramatic life changes. It is woven into every aspect of existence. Our thoughts arise and fade, emotions ebb and flow, and even our physical bodies are in constant flux. The Buddha described this reality in the Anicca Sutta, emphasizing that all conditioned things are impermanent: anicca, unsatisfactory; dukkha, and non-self, anatta. This means that nothing possesses a fixed, independent identity. The person you are today is not the same as the person you were yesterday. Relationships evolve, careers change, and identities shift. Impermanence is not a flaw, it is the very nature of reality. The liberation in letting go. When we accept that everything changes, we free ourselves from the burdens of attachment and fear. Letting go doesn't mean passivity. It means releasing our grip on expectations and outcomes. We can still plan and strive, but we do so with an open heart, ready to adapt to whatever arises. A powerful metaphor for this is the Buddhist image of a raft. The Buddha taught that even his teachings are like a raft, useful for crossing a river, but to be left behind once the shore is reached. Similarly, our possessions, achievements, and relationships serve a purpose but should not be mistaken for permanent sources of security. Cultivating resilience through mindfulness. Mindfulness is the foundation for navigating life's unpredictability By staying present with our experiences, whether joy or sorrow, we develop the capacity to meet change with equanimity. When a sudden loss occurs, mindfulness helps us acknowledge the pain without being consumed by it. It allows us to observe our thoughts and emotions without judgment, creating space for resilience to emerge. One practical mindfulness practice is the body scan. Lie quietly and direct your attention to different parts of your body, noticing sensations without trying to change them. This practice builds awareness of impermanence as you observe how sensations shift from moment to moment. The paradox of impermanence. CNEB. Impermanence contains a profound paradox. While it can bring suffering, it also offers endless possibility. The same truth that allows joy to fade creates space for new happiness to arise. A relationship may end, but this change can lead to self-discovery. A career may collapse, but it might open doors to a more fulfilling path. The Buddhist story of the man who lost everything in a flood illustrates this wisdom. When asked how he remained calm, he replied, "This too has changed, and so will everything that comes after." His acceptance of change didn't negate his pain but allowed him to see beyond it. He recognized that even in darkness, light can emerge. Living with urgency and gratitude, awareness of impermanence fosters two seemingly contradictory yet complementary attitudes: urgency and gratitude. Urgency, knowing that time is limited, we are motivated to act with intention. We prioritize mending relationships, pursuing passions, and living authentically. We stop postponing what matters, recognizing that someday may never come. Gratitude. Impermanence teaches us to cherish the present. We learn to appreciate small moments, a shared meal, a sunset, a kind word that might otherwise go unnoticed. Gratitude deepens our connection to life, transforming ordinary experiences into sources of joy. Practices for embracing impermanence. 1. Reflect daily on change. Take time each morning or evening to reflect on how your life is in flux. Consider changes in your body, mind, relationships, or environment. Ask yourself, what am I clinging to, and how can I release it? 2. Meditate on the transient nature of thoughts. Sit quietly and observe your thoughts as they arise and fall away. Notice how no single thought remains permanent. This practice builds awareness of impermanence in the mind. 3. Practice beginner's mind. Approach daily activities with curiosity and openness. As if for the first time, this mindset helps you stay present and reduces resistance to change. 4. Create rituals for letting go. Write down something you're clinging to on a piece of paper and burn it, symbolizing release, or visit a flowing river and imagine your attachments dissolving into the water. 5. Embrace imperfect moments. When faced with disappointment, acknowledge the pain, but also look for opportunities for growth. Ask, what can this change teach me? Conclusion. The truth that everything can change in a split second is both humbling and liberating. It invites us to release our illusions of control and to embrace the fluidity of life. By cultivating mindfulness, gratitude, and resilience, we transform impermanence from a source of anxiety into a catalyst for awakening. When we accept that nothing lasts forever, we begin to live more fully in the present. We find freedom in letting go, peace in uncertainty, and hope in the endless possibility of change. In the words of the Buddha, health is uncertain. Action must be done now. Tomorrow does not come for everyone. May this awareness guide you to live with courage, presence, and an open heart. Point No. 4. What you own is not who you are. Transcending material identity through Buddhist wisdom on non-attachment. In a world obsessed with possessions, status, and external validation, it's easy to conflate our worth with what we own. We define ourselves by our jobs, bank balances, social media followers, and material achievements, as if these things somehow complete us. But Buddhism offers a liberating perspective. What you own is not who you are. This teaching challenges the illusion of a fixed self dependent on externals and invites us to explore a deeper, more authentic sense of identity rooted in awareness and inner freedom. The illusion of possession-based identity. Modern culture conditions us to believe that happiness and self-worth stem from acquisition. Advertisements equate cars and designer clothes with success, social media reduces identity to likes and followers, and we're taught that doing more and having more equates to being more. Yet, this identity is fragile. When we lose a job, outgrow possessions, or face financial setbacks, our sense of self crumbles. Buddhism identifies this as a fundamental misunderstanding of reality. The teaching of anatta non-self reveals that there is no permanent, independent I to possess or be possessed. Our sense of self is a dynamic interplay of physical, emotional, and mental processes, ever-changing and interconnected with the world around us. Clinging to possessions as extensions of the self ignores this truth and traps us in a cycle of craving and fear. The three poisons and the cycle of suffering. Attachment to possessions is fueled by the three poisons. 1. Ignorance. Avidya. Failing to see the impermanent and impersonal nature of all things, we mistakenly believe that acquiring or retaining possessions will bring lasting security. 2. Greed, lobha. The craving for more, driven by the delusion that possessions can fill inner voids. 3. Hatred, dosa. The aversion to loss, which manifests as anxiety, jealousy, or despair when possessions are taken away. These poisons perpetuate suffering. The more we define ourselves by what we own, the more vulnerable we become to fear of loss, inadequacy, or obscurity. We become slaves to maintenance, comparison, and the endless pursuit of the next acquisition. The freedom of non-attachment. Non-attachment is not about renouncing possessions, but about changing our relationship to them. Buddhism teaches that we can enjoy things without clinging to them. When we let go of the belief that possessions define us, we free ourselves from the suffering that accompanies loss, theft, or obsolescence. This freedom begins with understanding that all conditioned things are impermanent, anicca. The Buddha said, "All conditioned things are like a dream, a mirage, a bubble, a shadow." Recognizing this, we can appreciate possessions for their temporary utility rather than their symbolic value. A home becomes a shelter rather than a status symbol. Clothes become garments rather than extensions of identity. Discovering your true self. If not possessions, then what is the self? Buddhism points us inward to a self that is not a fixed entity, but a flowing awareness, a consciousness that experiences life without being trapped by it. This true self is often obscured by layers of craving and attachment, but it can be uncovered through mindfulness and meditation. The Buddha described this awareness as tathata, or thusness, the suchness of reality as it is, unfiltered by ego or desire. It is the calm beneath the waves of thought and emotion, the space of clarity that exists when we stop identifying with transient labels. Practices for cultivating non-attachment. 1. Mindfulness of possessions. Regularly reflect on the transient nature of your belongings. Ask yourself, how long will this last? What happens when it's gone? This practice softens attachment by reminding you of impermanence. 2. Simplify your life. Experiment with minimalism. Donate items you no longer use and observe how it feels to own less. Notice if your happiness increases when you're not burdened by excess. 3. Gratitude for impermanence. Instead of lamenting the loss of possessions, thank them for their role in your life. When a phone breaks or clothes wear out, acknowledge their service and let them go with grace. 4. Meditate on non-self. Sit quietly and observe the fluid nature of your thoughts, emotions, and physical sensations. Notice how nothing within you remains constant. Reflect on how this fluidity mirrors the impermanence of possessions. 5. Redefine success. Shift your focus from external achievements to internal growth. Measure your worth by kindness, self-awareness, and resilience rather than by wealth or status. The ripple effect of non-attachment. When we stop defining ourselves by possessions, our relationships and worldview transform. We become more empathetic, recognizing that others, too, are trapped by craving and fear. This fosters compassion and reduces competition. Non-attachment also cultivates environmental stewardship. By consuming less and cherishing what we have, we reduce waste and honor the interconnectedness of all life. A core Buddhist value. Conclusion. The teaching that what you own is not who you are is a call to liberation. It invites us to peel back the layers of illusion and discover a self that is unshakable, free from the tyranny of craving and fear. By embracing non-attachment, we find peace in uncertainty, joy in simplicity, and a deeper connection to the world. As the Zen master Shunryu Suzuki wrote, "Attachment is detachment." When we let go of possessions as sources of identity, we paradoxically gain everything: inner freedom, clarity, and the ability to love fully without clinging. In this freedom, we discover that true wealth lies not in what we own, but in what we are. Beings capable of awareness, love, and growth. Point No. 5. There is always pain before success. Embracing suffering as a pathway to growth and enlightenment. Success, in its many forms, is often romanticized as a destination of unending joy and fulfillment. Yet the journey to success is rarely a straight path of triumph and celebration. Instead, it is a winding road marked by pain, struggle, and hardship. Buddhism acknowledges this reality with profound insight. There is always pain before success. This truth does not diminish the value of achievement, but invites us to reframe our understanding of suffering. Pain, when met with mindfulness and courage, becomes a transformative force that shapes resilience, wisdom, and authenticity. The nature of suffering, dukkha. The Buddha's first noble truth states that suffering, dukkha, is an inherent part of life. It manifests as physical pain, emotional distress, and the dissatisfaction that arises from impermanence. Even moments of happiness are tinged with the knowledge that they will eventually end. The second noble truth identifies craving and attachment as primary causes of suffering. We suffer when we cling to desires for how things should be, resist change, or fear loss. When pursuing success, these truths become particularly evident. We crave achievement, attach our self-worth to outcomes, and fear failure. When progress stalls or setbacks occur, suffering intensifies. Yet Buddhism teaches that suffering is not merely an obstacle, it is a teacher. Pain is a catalyst for growth. Pain forces us to confront our limitations, fears, and illusions. It strips away the facade of invincibility and reveals our true capacities for resilience and adaptation. Consider the Buddha's own journey before enlightenment. He endured years of ascetic practices, facing extreme physical deprivation and mental torment. These trials did not divert him from his path, but deepened his understanding of the human condition. Similarly, the greatest stories of success, whether in business, art, science, or personal development, involve narratives of struggle. J.K. Rowling wrote the first Harry Potter manuscript while living in poverty and facing countless rejections. Her pain became the soil in which her creativity and perseverance flourished. The alchemy of adversity. Buddhism views pain through the lens of prajna wisdom, recognizing that hardship can transform us in ways comfort never could. When met with mindfulness, pain reveals one's strength and vulnerability. Pain teaches us to acknowledge weakness without shame. It builds emotional resilience, enabling us to face future challenges with grace. 2. Clarity of purpose. Struggle often strips away distractions, helping us clarify what truly matters. Many find their life's work emerges from resolving a personal pain point. 3. Compassion through shared humanity. Suffering connects us to others. When we've endured hardship, we better understand and empathize with those facing similar struggles. The middle way. Neither resignation nor resistance. Buddhism rejects both extremes of indulgence in suffering and denial of it. The middle way encourages us to acknowledge pain without being consumed by it. When facing difficulty, accept the reality. Resist the urge to catastrophize or minimize your experience. Simply acknowledge, this is painful, and that sip's okay. Investigate the causes. Reflect on how your actions, beliefs, or circumstances contributed to the pain. What lessons can you extract? Cultivate equanimity. Practice staying present with discomfort without reacting impulsively. Mindfulness helps you observe pain without identifying with it. Mindfulness practices for navigating pain. Loving kindness meditation metta. Direct compassion toward yourself during hardship. Silently repeat, may I be safe, may I be healthy, may I be at ease. This counters self-criticism and fosters self-acceptance. 2. Pain body awareness. Eckhart Tolle's concept of the pain body, a collection of past emotional wounds, can help you recognize when pain is driving your reactions. Pause and breathe when triggered, observing the pain without acting on it. 3. The RAIN technique, developed by Buddhist teacher Tara Brach. This involves recognizing the emotion, allowing it to be present, investigating its bodily sensations, and nurturing yourself with compassion. Success, redefined. Buddhism challenges the materialistic definitions of success. True success is not measured by external achievements, but by internal growth, freedom from craving, a calm mind, and the ability to act with wisdom and compassion. External milestones may still matter, but they become byproducts of a life lived with integrity rather than goals pursued at the cost of well-being. Conclusion. The truth that there is always pain before success invites us to embrace suffering not as a punishment, but as a transformative journey. It teaches us that pain, met with mindfulness and resilience, can become the pathway to enlightenment and authentic achievement. By releasing our attachment to outcomes and staying present with discomfort, we transform hardship into wisdom and emerge stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. In the words of the Buddha, the way is hard for the thoughtless but easy for the mindful. May this wisdom guide you to navigate life's challenges with grace and emerge into a success that nourishes your deepest self. Point no. 6. No one escapes aging, sickness, and death. Finding peace with life's inevitable cycle through Buddhist wisdom. Aging, sickness, and death are the great equalizers of human existence. Regardless of wealth, status, or achievement, every living being is subject to the natural processes of decay and renewal. These realities, while often met with fear and denial, are central to Buddhist teachings on impermanence and the path to liberation. Buddhism does not shy away from these truths, but instead offers profound insights into how we can transform our relationship with them, finding peace, wisdom, and compassion in the face of life's inevitabilities. The inevitability of aging, sickness, and death. Aging is a continuous process that begins at birth and progresses steadily throughout life. Our bodies change, grow weaker, and eventually succumb to the limitations of time. Sickness, whether acute or chronic, disrupts our sense of well-being and reminds us of our physical vulnerability. Death, the final chapter, is a universal destination that no one can avoid. These truths are not pessimistic, they are simply factual. The Buddha recognized that confronting these realities is essential for awakening from the delusion of permanence and the fear that accompanies it. The Buddhist perspective on impermanence and suffering. Buddhism teaches that all conditioned things are impermanent, anicca, and subject to suffering, dukkha. Aging, sickness, and death are natural manifestations of these truths. The first noble truth acknowledges that suffering exists, and the second noble truth identifies craving and attachment as its causes. When we cling to the illusion of permanence, we resist the natural flow of life, leading to fear and suffering. The third noble truth offers hope. Suffering can end through the cessation of craving. The fourth noble truth provides the path to this cessation. the Eightfold Path, which includes right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. By walking this path, we can develop the wisdom and compassion to face aging, sickness, and death with equanimity. Embracing aging as a teacher. Aging is often perceived as a decline, but Buddhism invites us to see it as a teacher. As we age, we gain wisdom through experience, develop deeper self-awareness, and have the opportunity to reflect on life's journey. The physical changes that come with aging remind us to prioritize inner growth over external appearances. The Buddha taught that recognizing the impermanence of the body can free us from vanity and self-consciousness, allowing us to focus on cultivating virtues like kindness and patience. Facing sickness with compassion and resilience. Sickness challenges our sense of control and forces us to confront our mortality. Buddhism encourages us to respond to illness with compassion for ourselves and others. When we are sick, we can practice mindfulness of the body, observing our symptoms without aversion or fear. This practice helps us stay present with our experience and reduces suffering by breaking the cycle of resistance. Moreover, sickness can deepen our empathy for those who suffer. By acknowledging our shared vulnerability, we become more compassionate and willing to support others in their times of need. The Buddhist concept of bodhicitta, the aspiration to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings, is nurtured through such acts of compassion. Transforming fear of death into wisdom. Death is the most feared of the three inevitabilities, largely because it is shrouded in mystery and uncertainty. Buddhism addresses this fear by encouraging us to reflect on death regularly. The Tibetan Buddhist practice of contemplation of death and impermanence involves meditating on the certainty of death and the uncertainty of its timing. This practice helps us live more mindfully and with greater purpose. The Buddha taught that death is not an end, but a transition. In the Buddhist view, death is part of the continuous cycle of birth, aging, sickness, death, and rebirth, samsara. Enlightenment frees us from this cycle by dissolving the attachments that bind us to it. By understanding death as a natural part of existence, we can release our fear of it and find peace in the present moment. The practice of mindfulness in daily life. Mindfulness is a cornerstone of Buddhist practice and is particularly valuable in facing aging, sickness, and death. By staying present with our experiences, we can observe the arising and passing of physical sensations, emotions, and thoughts without judgment. This awareness helps us accept change as a natural part of life and reduces the suffering that comes from resistance. Mindfulness can be cultivated through formal meditation practices, such as focusing on the breath or body scan meditations. It can also be integrated into daily activities, such as eating, walking, or washing dishes. By bringing full attention to these moments, we honor the preciousness of life and develop a deeper appreciation for each moment. Cultivating compassion for self and others. Recognizing that everyone faces aging, sickness, and death fosters compassion. We can extend kindness to ourselves when we experience suffering and to others who are navigating their own challenges. Compassion does not mean pity. It means understanding and sharing in the suffering of others with a desire to alleviate it. The Buddhist practice of metta-bhavana, loving-kindness meditation, is a powerful way to cultivate compassion. By directing loving kindness toward ourselves, loved ones, neutral individuals, and even those who have caused us harm, we expand our capacity for empathy and connection. Preparing for death consciously. Preparing for death is not about succumbing to despair, but about living authentically. Buddhist traditions offer various practices to prepare for death, such as writing ethical wills, resolving conflicts, and reflecting on one's values. These practices help us ensure that our lives align with our deepest intentions and that we leave a positive legacy. Additionally, some Buddhist traditions include death rituals and visualizations to familiarize practitioners with the process of dying. These practices aim to reduce fear and anxiety by making the unknown more familiar. The paradox of acceptance. Accepting aging, sickness, and death does not mean passivity or resignation. It means acknowledging reality while taking active steps to care for ourselves and others. Acceptance creates space for resilience and adaptation, allowing us to face challenges with grace and courage. The paradox is that by accepting life's impermanence, we become more fully alive. We cherish each moment, prioritize what truly matters, and let go of illusions that once consumed us. As the Zen saying goes, death is not the opposite of life. Living is. Conclusion. The Buddhist teaching that no one escapes aging, sickness, and death is not a message of hopelessness, but of profound liberation. By embracing these truths, we transform fear into wisdom, suffering into compassion, and impermanence into a catalyst for authentic living. We learn to honor each moment as the precious gift it is, and to approach life with open hearts and minds. In facing these inevitabilities, we discover a deeper truth. Our true nature is not subject to decay or death. It is the boundless awareness that underlies all experiences. As we journey through life's cycles, may we walk with mindfulness, compassion, and the understanding that every moment is an opportunity to grow, to love, and to awaken. Final lesson: integrating Buddhist wisdom into everyday life. Throughout our exploration of these 6 life-changing Buddhist truths, we've uncovered profound insights into the nature of suffering, impermanence, and the path to liberation. The final lesson is not merely a summary but a call to action, an invitation to weave these teachings into the fabric of your daily existence. Buddhism is not a passive philosophy, but a dynamic practice that transforms how we engage with life. Here's how to embody these truths in meaningful ways. 1. Cultivate daily mindfulness. Mindfulness is the gateway to living these teachings. Begin each day with a short meditation, focusing on your breath and observing thoughts without attachment. Carry this awareness into everyday activities, eating, walking, working, by staying fully present. Notice when your mind wanders into craving or aversion and gently return to the moment. 2. Practice compassion and forgiveness. Transform relational pain into connection by practicing metta, loving kindness meditation. Regularly extend send wishes to yourself, loved ones, and even those who've hurt you. When conflicts arise, respond with curiosity rather than judgment. Ask, what suffering might this person be carrying, and seek to understand before reacting. 3. Embrace impermanence with grace. Acknowledge change as a constant companion. When losses occur, mourn them fully, but also recognize their role in life's rhythm. Celebrate fleeting joys without clinging. Create rituals to honor life's transitions, such as journaling about lessons learned during difficult phases or expressing gratitude for moments of beauty. 4. Simplify and detach from materialism. Audit your relationship with possessions. Identify items or achievements you equate with self-worth and reflect on their transient nature. Experiment with minimalism. Donate unused items and observe how freedom from excess feels. Measure success by internal growth, not external validation. 5. Reframe suffering as growth. When facing adversity, resist labeling it as bad. Instead, ask, what is this teaching me? Document insights gained from challenges. Share your struggles openly with trusted individuals to build resilience through community. 6. Honor life's cycle with awareness. Reflect on aging, sickness, and death regularly. Write an ethical will outlining your values and intentions. Practice mindful self-care and advocate for healthcare access for all. Discuss end-of-life wishes with loved ones to reduce future burdens. The Buddhist's call to share and subscribe. The Buddhist's final words, according to the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, were, all conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence. But he also emphasized sharing wisdom. Thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, and the life of the single candle is not shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. By sharing these teachings, you become a lamp-bearer in the journey toward awakening. Encourage others to subscribe to this path of mindfulness and compassion. Let your actions inspire those around you to seek liberation from suffering and embrace life's impermanence with grace. Closing reflection. These teachings are not abstract ideals but practical tools for liberation. They invite us to live with eyes wide open, hearts expansive, and minds free from delusion. As you step forward, remember the Buddhist's assurance, you yourselves must strive. The Buddhas only point the way. May your path be illuminated by curiosity, kindness, and courage. Share these truths, subscribe to their practice, and together, let us awaken to the beauty of this fleeting, precious life.